I think I've become a more effective leader by learning to listen well to those who follow me. And I think early in my days when I was in the position of being a person who was supporting leaders, I just learned to ask a lot of questions and excel in the areas were asked of me. But for me, very simply, leadership is influence and answering the question to change. And I think oftentimes when people talk about leadership, they confuse it with the word management. And management addresses complexity, but leadership addresses change. And I think an effective leader answers the question for an organization of where are we going, how will we get there, how we inspire the team, how do we accomplish these results. Those are some things that are critical. Leaders really grapple with the large, challenging areas to move organizations forward.
Welcome to the Upwards Podcast, where we discuss the intersection of Christian faith in the academy, church, and marketplace to illuminate the good work happening with individuals, institutions, and our communities. Today, I had the pleasure of speaking with Ed Ollie Jr., who has led in a wide range of institutions. He's been a pastor, he's led in the academy, and he's led in the nonprofit sector, and he's led in moments of real crisis. And the conversation was fascinating, where we discussed all kinds of issues, from what distinguishes a leader from a manager, to what does it mean to lead in crisis? How do you create a positive, healthy work culture? And what are some of the signs of a toxic or bad culture? We covered all kinds of ground, and I know you'll appreciate Ed and the really interesting conversation that we had. Ed, it is so good to be with you today. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule.
Thanks so much, John. It's great to be with you as well. I wish I had the temperatures that you have in Madison down here in North Carolina, but it's great to be with you today.
Yeah, we're kind of misty today, and I don't know, probably mid-70s. So what do you got down there?
Just a nice ho-hum 93 with probably 80% humidity. But my hair is having a good day, so it's all good.
Yeah, it looks like your scalp is in good shape there.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm doing well.
Okay. Well, I was just down in North Carolina. We had our study center meetings in North Carolina last week, and it was hot. I've forgotten how humid and hot it can be, but it's beautiful country.
Yeah, it is really a nice place to be, probably in December through April. But yeah, it's a great place to be, and that's a great campus. My wife is a alum of Chapel Hill, so we just spent some time over there last month.
That's great. That's great. Well, it was good to see you here a few months ago. For our listeners, Ed was here with John Anazu and actually interviewed John Anazu, really on this big theme about how we talk and communicate and listen well across our differences, and just did an amazing job in that interview. And I wanted to get you back because you're so fascinating and interesting based on all of your own experiences. I know currently you're the chair of the board of InterVarsity, I think, in the final... Okay, yeah. So you were also here for an InterVarsity board meeting, but there's so much to talk about. And I just, listening to you interview John and then our interactions just prompted me to make it a priority to get you here. And we're going to do that in the form of a podcast and a conversation today.
You bet. Pleasure to be here.
Good. Well, I know you've thought so much about leadership, and that's going to be the broad focus today. You have led in the marketplace, you've led in the church, and you've led in the academy. And those are three communities that we work with here and try to serve in our Madison community. But let me just start, Ed, with just a broad question, and then we'll sort of scroll through some of your professional experiences and life experiences. But how do you think about leadership? How would you define leadership? I know that can be a contested topic, but I would love to get your perspective on how you think about it.
Yeah, it is a very interesting. There's so many great words, and I should say descriptions about that word. But for me, very simply, leadership is influence and answering the question to change. Yeah. And I think oftentimes when people talk about leadership, they confuse it with the word management. And management addresses complexity, but leadership addresses change. And I think an effective leader answers the question for an organization of where are we going? How will we get there? How we inspire the team? How do we accomplish these results? Those are some things that are critical. Leaders really grapple with the large, challenging areas to move organizations forward.
Yeah. And I know that distinction between leadership and management is one that's been around a long time. People have thought and wrote a lot about that. Can the same person embody both strengths? Do you see that routinely, or is it a more rare combination for someone to hold both of those together?
I think it's more rare that they hold it together, to be honest. I think a lot of leaders become leaders because of external factors like charisma, inspiration, the ability to use words. But oftentimes, what I've found is that those very things could be impediments to really
Hmm.
moving organizations forward because at the end of the day, someone needs to be focusing on the budget. Somebody needs
Yeah.
to be helping making sure that the strategic plan is being followed. So could you have the same? You could. You probably need to have some elements and awareness for sure
Hmm.
of
Right.
that. But if you try to do it all yourself, depending on the scope and size of your organization, you're probably going to struggle.
Yeah. So you might have giftedness in both management and leadership. And of course, leaders have to manage laterally, they manage down. And in many cases, we're always following too. So leaders, even if you're in a senior position, the most senior position, you're probably taking cues from a board
That's right.
and having to manage a board. When you get to what I hear you saying is when you're in a situation and to be really effective as a leader, you're going to have to delegate and find others to help you manage. Even if you have those gifts, you can't pull it off yourself.
I I absolutely agree. And I know we'll get into that a little bit later, but I
Yeah.
think that delegation and understanding what it is that only you can do and doing everything you can to operate in that space creates space for people around you to be the best that they can be. So that self-awareness is probably one of the most important skills that I think that a leader can possess. And sometimes it's challenging that if it's not there.
Yeah. Good, good, good. Well, that's where I wanted to start today. I wanted to just get your quick take definition about how you think about leadership. And then we're going to talk about, I'd like to move into some of your experiences in leading and in managing. But I think it's always important, and I always enjoy the question and the opportunity to go back and just hear a little bit about a formative experience or two that was particularly impactful in shaping you as a leader. And I'm assuming you kind of identify as a leader more than a manager, but I shouldn't take that for granted. I'd love for you to respond to that. Do you see yourself more as a leader or a manager? And then can you take us back to an experience or two that really shaped you as someone who leads others?
Yeah, I would say I would definitely consider myself a leader. I think I've become a more effective leader by learning to listen well to those who follow me. And I think early in my days when I was in the position of being a person who was supporting leaders, I just learned to ask a lot of questions and excel in the areas that were asked of me. I can think of a couple moments early on in my leadership that I'll never forget. One is I led a walkout in high school. Now, you're not
Such a
getting
big
paid to lead in high school. I was a student government president.
Yeah.
And the short version is a conflict had broken out really among parents that made it to the local news, went all over the state, that the parents of a rival high school that was nearby said that we were bad apples at our school
Yeah.
and that they didn't want to merge or have conversations about that with our school. Well, I took issue with that. And the next day, started to talk with our leadership team, students, and I said, we're going to have a walkout during lunchtime because I was smart. I knew that teachers wouldn't think
Hmm.
highly about taking away
Hmm.
academic time.
Yeah.
So I organized a walkout. Majority of the school came out. I jumped on the top of our school placard, gave a speech. It was on the front page of the Des Moines Register. And what I realized from that, beyond organizing and listening behind the scenes, is that leaders see what others can't see, but it's important to help them see it. And what I saw was an opportunity to really put forth, we have a great school, we have great students, we have a great community. There's challenges for sure, but no one should be called outside of their name or their identity. No one has the right to define you but you. And so that was something, John, that early on I realized not just that words have power, but there's something about influencing others that I have that I should be a good steward and careful about.
So that was an early, I'm assuming you had experiences prior to that, but that was a really sort of high visibility experience and impactful and very heartfelt in the sense that you weren't willing to accept the way an outside community was identifying your community.
Yeah. It was, and just the creativity that it takes to, think about that. My team, we got on, we did press releases, we got the media involved, they came out. It became something much bigger very quickly, but was able to navigate that and didn't feel pressure in the midst of it. And I just thought, this is a unique feeling. I don't know if this is what I'm going to do for my future, but I definitely felt comfortable leading out in the community in that way.
Yeah. And I imagine that experience stayed with you. You've reflected back on that experience. I'm assuming over time, you've reflected on it today. How has it shaped your identity as a leader? Or and maybe more broadly, how do you describe yourself as a leader? If somebody said to you, Ed, how do you lead? What are, some of the values that really drive you? How would you self-identify as a person who leads others and wants to exercise influence well?
I think it's a combination of things. I think that growing up where I grew up, there was a level of resilience and grit that you needed to know who you were before you walked out of the house.
Yeah.
Because of the challenges that you were going to come up against throughout the day. And so I think there was early on a sense of the very fine line, my dad would say, is a fine line between cockiness and confidence.
Yeah.
Cockiness is full of self and at the, if you will, behest of others. But I think that there was a sense of confidence in, this is who God's created you to be. There should be no apology about who you are, but have humility to keep growing and keep learning. I think that humility piece is the piece that allowed influence, taking the posture of a learner, even when I felt like I knew something. If you take a posture as a learner, and I would say I'm a person that is curious and inquisitive and ask questions for understanding, that really embodies the spirit of the type of leader I am. I joke and say that for those in the listening audience that are people of faith, I'm Barnabas with Peter-like tendencies. And so I like to refresh the spirit of leaders and encourage people and definitely connect people with others. And there's also that sense of boldness that when called upon, that I can lead people through challenging times and bring clarity to situations. And so there's probably that balance. That really explains a lot about who I am.
Yeah, I want to come back to that crisis side of you and the way that you had the boldness of Peter, because I know you've led in some of those situations. You referenced your dad, and I know your family was really influential and continues to be influential, even as you think about this stage of your life. I wonder if you could take us back to your early years and just give us a glimpse into some of the formative experiences. What was it like growing up in your household, neighborhood, friendships, and maybe early school experiences? Just give you a couple of things to sort of select from, but what stands out in your mind in your earlier years as just being really formative for you?
Well, I was the oldest out of 6 kids, so you could tell it wasn't a quiet house. My parents originally are from Mississippi, the Delta. Itabena, Mississippi, small, and Indianola, Mississippi. And they moved up to Des Moines, Iowa, kind of during the Great Migration of the late 60s. And
Right.
my dad worked at John Deere throughout his career, and later bivocationally was a minister at our local church. And so
Mm.
I grew up watching this working class, family that really aimed hard to provide for the kids and the family. My dad was very much a public figure from a standpoint of his personality and being at church and in the community, things like that. It was good, easy with people and engaging. My mom is she was like the sage, the quiet assassin. She could see things and really read people and
Yeah.
had emotional intelligence that was high.
Hmm.
So I got both of those sides from them. But I would say one of the things that was interesting from a standpoint of my parents and the community, this church that we were in, Mission Temple Church of God in Christ, is a small um, Pentecostal church that is in Des Moines, Iowa. And I watched the pastor of that church, get this, John, he saved the tithes and offerings from over 20 years and walked
Wow.
in and bought the grounds of the old Des Moines area community college, which was moving to build a larger campus. He bought the grounds and built from the ground up a church. And I watched that community. And while there was not a lot of education from letters behind names in the ways that we would talk about it today, the wisest individuals and the most prayerful individuals that I've ever known in my life were at that church,
Yeah. Wow.
and just had a way of shepherding us as kids, challenging us. It was a really interesting place to be, and navigating that for myself is here I am in school and having this academic learning, gearing to go to college, but I had this community that were really supportive, loved me, prayed for me, cared for me, helped me along the way. So I never forget the roots that I have in Des Moines. And some of those people are still there today that have
Yeah.
helped make me who I am today.
Yeah. So a really healthy growing up church experience.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, there's, as in every church, there's challenges and things like that, but definitely I would say the positives outweighed the negatives. My godfather is the pastor today of that church,
Wow.
and James McNair Jr. Just had these guiding forces in my life that were basically, we're not going to allow you to fail.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're not going to allow you to be a knucklehead, go in the wrong direction. We're going to look out for you, and we're going to challenge you to be your best version of who God's calling you to be. And
Yeah.
I benefited from that greatly.
By the way, I like the use of that word knucklehead. I mean, that's probably a word that we could bring back a little bit in these days.
When you
That's
have
a little
teenagers, that word comes up a little bit more in your mind. That's for sure.
okay. I like that. I've often been a knucklehead. That's a word that it's descriptive, isn't it?
It sure is.
Tight family growing up. I know you had 6 brothers and sisters. Tight, close knit
Yeah,
family.
there was a gap between us of about 10 and a half years. And
Okay.
so I was the oldest, and we were tight, but then I left, you know, and went to college and never came back necessarily home to live. So I feel like there's like two versions of our family. There's like
Yeah.
my years and two of my oldest sisters, and then the three youngest. And we laugh today. I get stories still from them of what life was like when I left, meaning they got
Right.
everything that I didn't ever have the opportunity to get. But definitely, we had a close knit family. Not without obviously challenges, and but just a lot of love. And we just celebrated it was the 15th year my late mother passed away when she was 59. And so it's been 15 years without her. But we just have just great love for each other, and really grateful for the family.
Thanks for giving us a little bit of a snapshot of what it was like growing up in Des Moines with your family. I want to turn to your stints pastoring, and you've been in really unique situations. For our listeners, you've been in situations that have undergone traumatic or destabilizing experiences. I think generally why you were there, right? I don't know exactly. You can correct the timeline, but I think you were there when some of these situations happened. Harvest Bible Chapel. With James McDonald, that was in the Chicagoland area, and was in the news. And then Willow Creek Community Church with Bill Hybels, and you were, I think, were you pastoring the downtown Chicago, was it, or the North Shore? I can't remember.
So I was downtown Chicago when I was at Harvest, and then the North Shore campus when I was at Willow, and then on the senior leadership team of both.
Yeah, right. So you were right in the middle of those situations. I've got so many questions to ask you, but let me just let me ask you, start with this question. What have you learned about leadership in these types of situations? And, what I mean generally is crisis situations.
Wow. I took about 3 months just coming off of a sabbatical where I just shut everything down and made the decision, all good, but made the decision to step down from my role at Willow. Had accomplished everything that I wanted to do there. But I would say, just as a highlight, and we can dive into any of these are some things that I've learned over leading the last 10 years, really 3 churches, even in Nashville, through change.
Was the Nashville? I didn't know about the Nashville, but was there also kind of crisis in that situation as well? Okay.
Hermitage Hills Baptist Church led that through transition. That was a dying church that we led through change, and great situation there.
Yeah,
I would say hurt people. That change takes time. It's not won by charisma. It's facilitated, really being through a trustworthy person who's given trust by followers, influence people, and people don't want to be controlled. They want to be loved. And so coming into either of those situations, I realized there were people who were genuinely hurt. It wasn't personal about me. It was personal in they have experienced so much of their life in a place, and now they have questions that are not being answered to their satisfaction. And so hurt people. Second thing I've learned, vision leaks. It takes intentional long-term relationships to create sustained movement and change. And so you and I've talked, I was like, I will never go to another vision conference ever in my life. I don't need to go to another vision. I know how to cast clear vision. What I find the challenge is maintaining clarity and follow through to make vision move forward. And so that's something that I think that I've been able to really work on. You can import talent. Third, I would say, is you can import talent, but you can't import clarity. Right. When you're building and rebuilding something, you've walked through this. When you're rebuilding a team, you're hiring people to not just position, but values. You need to have clarity, and you can import that talent, but you've got it takes time to bring that talent together. I would say the fourth thing that I've learned is you need to really get good at asking good questions and just listening. Sometimes it's not even asking the question genuinely for even full dialogue. It's more to just listen to what is it that this person has that I need to learn and know, and place myself in a position of humility of you're the teacher now, and I need what you have. And then the other three, real briefly, I think most leaders don't respond to announcements. Leaders respond to being asked individually into leading. Conflict is good. It brings clarity. Maya Angelou says, when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. And I just think that we need to be reminded in the body of Christ, we're not part of gangs. We're in the body of Christ. And so I think pastors go through and leaders when they are assuming and rebuilding, it is brutal, man. The pressure, the stress. I think it takes a little time to step back and be understanding and say, hey, I see what you're going through, and how can I help? And people did that to me, and I did that to the people that led me, because it's really important, I think, to go through that. And then the last thing I'd say is prioritize your family. Keep your friends close.
Yeah.
Keep a journal and have a great counselor.
Yeah.
You can't do this by yourself, regardless of how strong you are. We weren't created to be alone. We were created for community. And I think the way that so many leaders fall into this trap, it's so easy. We've heard the stories. We'll continue to hear them, is that the last thing that we tend to want to prioritize is our family.
Yeah.
And the people that are close to us. So just being in a small group, staying connected, man, staying humble, having a group of people that really are your ride or die, that they're not afraid to challenge you and say the difficult things. That's just the highlight of some things that I feel like I'm learning and have learned over the last 10 years.
Yeah, that's really helpful. So that's sort of a big picture, I don't know, 20 or 30,000 feet as you reflect back on these three experiences, and what you've learned and the priorities that have been important that really helped you stay grounded during these experiences. I wonder if you could take us back to one or two moments of crisis in these situations. Some of us might be trying to lead and manage through crisis right now where we don't have the benefit of actually looking at it from 20,000 feet or 30,000 feet like you have. We're right in the middle of it. We find ourselves in a situation that's just very, very difficult. What would you say, leaders who are in that situation today, as you reflect back on those experiences, what was really critical for you in that moment to help you navigate leading through crisis as it was unfolding real time?
Yeah. I remember one afternoon vividly. I've talked about it in counseling. One of the pastors I really respect, Pastor Dave Stone, Southeast Christian Church, retired a couple years back, and he was helping lead us through some things. And
this was which church?
This was at Harvest Bible Chapel.
Harvest Bible. Mm-hmm.
And I'll never forget, one of the elders asked Dave, what is your greatest concern for these pastors that are here? So all of us were sitting together, the campus pastors. Without hesitation, Dave says, their marriages. Now, candidly, I wasn't thinking that was going to be the answer.
Yeah.
There's so many other things that we were dealing with, but it was in that moment that I realized that just like you're going and getting ready for a flight to take off, they go through the safety warnings and they always remind you, if there is a crash, to put the mask on yourself first.
Mm-hmm.
As a kid, I was like, man, that seems kind of morbid. Don't you want to help grandma who's sitting next to you? What? So, no, you put the mask on yourself first, and then you help someone else.
Right.
Well, spiritually, turning that around, I realized that oftentimes I've heard people say the order of priority in their life, it's God, my wife, my children, my family, my job, my friends, et cetera.
Yep.
But I really, years ago, I changed that and I said, no, it's actually God, then my wife and my kids, because if I'm not in tune, and have self-awareness of what's going on with me spiritually and emotionally, I'm going to be a train wreck in my marriage, and I'm going to hurt my family, and I'm going to hurt those that are around me. So I would say that's a moment I'll never forget, that during a high crisis time, we focused not on the problem or the challenges. We really started to focus on ourselves and where are the safety nets that you have and the places to go to be able to work on yourself so that you can be effective.
And then offering safety nets to others who are on the journey with you, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So in the last two churches, very high visibility leaders, I don't want to get into the specifics of those situations, but what have you learned about restoration and redemption when we have experiences of failed leadership, whether they're our own failures or the failures of others around us? What are your insights about how we help restore people or not, depending on the situation? Love to get your insights on that, because, you were right in the middle of two very high profile situations where, they were difficult, and lots of people were affected by the leadership or lack thereof.
Yeah. I would say generally, this is not to any particular situation. My heart goes out to those who are either victims or have experienced different levels of spiritual abuse or challenges. I would just say that the church in general is phenomenal at killing its own. We read scriptures, we talk about redemption, we talk about restoration, but it's astounding how difficult that becomes. It's almost guilty until proven innocent instead of innocent until proven guilty. And so what I've learned, and this is the most difficult part, is a friend of mine said, everyone has the right to know everything, but everyone doesn't have the need to know. And there's a word that oftentimes is used in these times that, hey, the church just needs to be more transparent. People need to be more transparent. I think that's funny because Jesus never talked about transparency. Jesus was authentic. He had 3 people who knew everything outside of the Father, and he ran with 12. And so when I look at these situations, what I just, they're so complex, John, and there's layers, and people often want to know more than you can share.
Yeah.
And I asked the question once to someone, if you knew everything that I know, how would that help you serve Jesus? And in most cases, that's not the reality at all. And so I've just found it to be a really challenging space to walk out the gospel and passages that we love to use in Matthew. And well, it's interesting. Conflict biblically is always the hope, the desire is reconciliation,
right?
Unless the person or the party on the other side, has egregious offense or something that is that you've continually been abused, you continually are experiencing things, and it's healthy for you to walk away. And we could talk about that as well. But I think that that's something that I've really wrestled with, is how we speak about one another, how we speak about people who have been impacted, victimized, and then our posture toward reconciliation, if that's even a possibility. It's really challenging and it's really rare to see. Usually people cause an offense, they're judged, dealt with, and they disappear with no explanation. And that's a really hard place for the body to absorb and to deal with.
Yeah. There's so much there. You're right. And there's often layers, and it's often complicated. And there are individuals that need to know all the details, but probably that doesn't extend to everybody that has, that's involved at some level. So you have to be discerning about what's shared, because there are lots of parties involved. what would pastorally, if you're interacting with someone who has had a feeling of some sort and it's some kind of public failure, how do you come alongside them pastorally? This is probably not a side we explore as much, but if you were counseling or just coming along someone as a friend who had an experience of had perpetrated some kind of leadership breach, and it was out at this point, how would you come alongside that person pastorally? And what are your priorities in coming alongside that person?
Well, in the context of a church, obviously, there's more than likely an oversight board or
Mm-hmm.
someone that is there that you would be working with. But for sure, I think there's kind of three things. One is there's the personal, there's the spiritual, and then there's the psychological slash restoration,
Yeah.
piece. I think that walking alongside a person with confidence and with privacy is so significant and important. Giving them a safe place that they could both share with you, but also be challenged to take steps in their
Mm-hmm.
healing in the
Yeah.
process. Obviously, there would be a need to have removal of their office for a season, depending on the transgression. It may even be permanently, but
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
sure there would be a stoppage of front-facing ministry, so that the person could receive the care and the healing that they
Yeah.
need. There's obviously another party that's probably involved, and others. So you're not just talking about the individual. You're also talking about that wider sphere. But for the sake of the example, I'm talking about the person who's caused offense.
Yeah.
I think that the second thing is um, there needs to be an addressing of the situation and making amends. This is more than an apology. This is where it gets challenging because sometimes this is a legal process.
Right.
Sometimes there's non-disclosure things that are involved, depending on the situation. There needs to be retribution slash repentance that is dealt with. And then the third part is there needs to be a care plan. I remember walking through someone for was over a year, but there was counseling that was involved. Uh, there were a lot of other things there were steps that were involved that the person was required to walk through. In some cases, that results, John, in a restoration to ministry of some sort. In other cases, it may result in a decision that this person would not be fit to be able to come back in the context of vocational ministry.
Yeah.
And then there's others where the person may go to another place. I'm more concerned these days in people who disappear and go to other places and set up shop and or
Yeah.
get
Yeah.
hired. But people obviously don't have the information maybe that you have of what has transpired. And so
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
where it's challenging from a standpoint of honoring a person's process, but also making sure that the body of Christ is also protected and made aware.
Yeah, that is so well said. And I think it's hard for us to do that hard work. I mean, it's really hard to do that hard work of attending to the needs of the victims
Yeah.
and those who have been hurt, and also having a commitment to healing as
Yeah.
best as we can and restoration, depending on the circumstances for the person
Yeah.
who was involved in the offense, right? Who
Yeah.
perpetrated the offense. So it's really tricky, and I don't think the church does this very well, and unfortunately.
No, it's hard. It's hard work. And what I think that I realized is that you're going to disappoint someone on either side. And you're just trying to keep your soul in a place that's pure before the Lord, and be honest and transparent to those that are in the process and those close to you, and give the rest, to the Lord.
Yeah. Related to the discussion we've been having, I want to ask you the question about what you've learned about failure and its purpose in our personal or communal life. And I know you have a friend, Jeff Henderson, who's taught you an important question when it comes to, hopefully it was okay for me to reveal his name.
Yeah.
I don't know
Yeah.
Jeff,
That's great. That's
but
great.
he's helped you with performance reviews. And I wonder if you might share that.
Yeah. There's a question that Jeff introduced to me years ago, just kind of incorporated it. By the way, it's great for marriage as well. But I have this question is, what's it like to live on the other side of me? And the key is you're not to respond, you're to listen. It's literally just to listen. That which may come across, maybe there's something that's like, that's not true. You just take that to the Lord and you let it roll up. But there's always an element of truth, even positive, negative. There's always an element that you can listen to. And I think one of the things that I've learned in leadership is that I don't know one person in my life or in scripture that's ever accomplished anything for the Lord that has not experienced failure. It's an essential element of leadership, but it's this hilarious, challenging conundrum, is it not, that we do everything we can not to fail. I mean, we work hard not to fail, but when we do, it's how we face failure and the posture in which that we face that failure that earns the trust of our followers, our friends, and our family, and more importantly, the Lord himself. And I think that's why David is such a interesting case study, is that I don't know a whole lot of people who failed on that level, and yet God has called him a man after my own heart. Well, why is that? It's because of the way he responded in times of failure.
Right. Yeah, that absolutely. And I've often wished that in the social sector and other sectors, we could have a little bit of that entrepreneurial mindset of like the startup tech culture, right? Where a failure, if you don't have a failure or two, you haven't earned your stripes.
Yeah.
You're not taken seriously, right? There's something essential about failing.
Yeah.
That you can only learn in failure. And I think we'd probably all be helped if we had a little bit more of that mindset at times. But it's a tough mindset to take on, isn't it?
I think it is. I think it's interesting. We like to fail in private, but many of us have jobs where we fail in public.
Right.
And so if you fail in public, you feel like you're at the mercy of, of those that are around. And boy, it just takes a lot of courage to fail forward.
Yeah.
It just takes a lot.
Yeah. Well, we talked some about, the tough cultures that we can find ourselves in that are difficult and under duress and maybe even, bordering toxic. But what constitutes a healthy culture? If we're a leader and working toward cultures and organizations that are going to be viable over not just years, but even decades, what are the kinds of things we should be thinking about in the way of positive organizational culture?
That's a great question, because I think that it really is everything these days. Is what's the culture of your organization? Jenny Catron is a good friend, and she runs the Foresight company. She's great. I've just kind of expanded on a blog that she wrote years ago. That I think there's 5 C's of culture. There's celebration, collaboration, communication, community, and conflict.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you want to have a great culture or growing culture, you need to have values, and those values is what you celebrate at every point. How do you celebrate those? Collaborating. You're not the most important person in the world, and your ideas is that you have a team. And when a team is asked into process to solve problems, it builds community, builds trust, builds care. Communication, clarity is something everyone talks about, and it's so difficult to receive. It's not just communication and clarity, but I realize that information is power. And so sharing information, not everything, but sharing enough that people feel like they understand not only the vision, but get this, they understand why they're important in making it happen.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Community, we're not created to be alone. Just having spaces of community and in an organization, do people have places of community that they can grow and take ground and maybe even prepare themselves for greater responsibility? And then nobody wants to talk about conflict, but any great organization has some good conflict. You get a chance to
Yeah.
learn from each other. You can debate on topics, but when we go outside the door, we're one.
Yeah. Yeah.
But inside the door, we can ask the questions. We can really go after it. And I think there's some signs that you probably could look for if your organization is not healthy. But those are some things that I would say the 5 C's of having a healthy culture.
Yeah. What are the signs that you're paying attention to, the dashboard, so to speak, that might be indicating that something's going amiss or going wrong or is on a bad path?
Michael Hyatt talks about cynicism in organizations. It's a cancer that if you just become a cynic, I think some people think that cynicism is a spiritual gift. It's not. So that's one thing. Gossip, the meeting after the meeting, what I would have really done, just spending time in that is really toxic. And then the last one probably is more prevalent than we care to know is it's confusion. If you have more confusion than you have clarity in your organization, the problem is you, not the organization. As a leader, the problem is you. You are responsible for providing that clarity. And if people don't know the vision, why they're doing what they're doing, and where we're going, that always comes back to you as a leader.
Yeah.
So I'd say those 3 things you want to be watchful for. If those 3 things are prevalent or pervasive, you're going to have a problem.
Yeah. Yeah. That's helpful. Boy, that confusion one is convicting. I think, particularly if you're undergoing a lot of change, I know it's so important to just keep communicating over and over again. And sometimes as a leader, it can sound like you're maybe over communicating, right? That you keep saying the same thing, but I'm not sure you can ever hit that threshold.
I don't think so
Clarity.
either.
Yeah.
I think you can. Craig Rochelle says, you say the vision over and over, and then someone says, okay, I got it. I know. And he said, at that point, you're almost saying it enough.
Yeah.
You can't say it enough.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really, really, really helpful. Well, I want to broaden out a little bit here and ask you your input or your advice about someone in a church, marketplace, or the academy more broadly, where we're on the bad side of the culture equation, where something seems to be amiss. How would you advise the person who finds themselves in the middle of that organization? When should they stay and press for change? And when should they consider leaving? And it could be a workplace, a church, or even an academic environment.
Yeah. It's hard. I think that this will, particularly for people of faith, I think you need to pause first and just pray and do nothing. Just pray and really think through what is the unique ability that I bring to the table?
Mm-hmm.
What is it that I uniquely do that maybe others don't? But if I bring this to the table, I could help the situation. And, maybe there's something unique, for you in that regard. I think it's important to limit your circles when you're starting the process, because you're probably dealing with something that's very sensitive, and it's not okay to share with everyone,
Right.
particularly if you are in a situation that you're going to need to maybe approach or follow up with that. Stay away from social media, very important. Just because you think it, just because you feel it, doesn't mean you need to post it or tweet it. And so stay away from social media. But here's where it gets really challenging. And I want to be really sensitive in this, because at some point, this person who is maybe, or the issue, but it's usually a person, you're going to need to confront them in private. And for some people, particularly my sisters as well, oftentimes it's not safe to go alone. And so sometimes you may need to have a third party present, or
Mm-hmm.
HR, if it's a safe place, may that have a whistleblower policy that you can go to them and be able to have a conversation. But going to a person in private gives the person the dignity to be able to respond and be able to be
Yeah.
made aware of what's going on. Most organizations have, protocols or conflict policies and how they go about things. I would just obviously take note of those things. But let's just say that I've done those things and it hasn't worked out. Then you're in a situation where you need to possibly go to the board or to the leadership body with integrity, with class, stating your case. I would put it in writing uh, with evidence and make sure that your case is stated and make it known to that leadership body. This is the part where it's challenging because if you get to that point, you probably are already considering another
Mm-hmm.
situation, which is,
Right.
should I stay or should I go?
Right.
And I think if I could say this loudly without shouting, I would say do everything you can to leave well if you are to leave, because you have friends that are still working at said organization
Mm-hmm.
who are doing their level best to try to lead forward. And I would even say, in most cases, the leaders are doing that as well. So it's important to do that with integrity, with grace, but move on.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's this is the body of Christ.
Yeah, that is such a helpful framework to think about how to raise concerns in a constructive way that will be heard. Because I think the way we deliver the message, and often there are protocols that are set up, and if there aren't, maybe that's part of the change we can be a part of as well, is to establish those protocols and establish them before a crisis occurs, right? Or there's some kind of conflict. But following the protocols and doing it in a way where your voice can be heard is really important for everybody involved. And I think you've laid out a really important framework. And I'd like to sort of parlay that into a question about living in this divisive world. You're someone who strikes me as working well across differences. You've had a lot of experience of this. You care deeply about it. You're very relational at your core. You're also very strategic, and you believe in organizations, and you understand the role that organizations play, and you're not afraid of conflict. Anytime you have people gathered working together, there are going to be differences, right? There is going to be conflict, and we shouldn't shy away from that. What have you learned that you might share with our listeners about working across difference and conflict?
I think that there's two things. One, you need to know what the value structure is that runs your life. If you don't know what your values are, uh, it's highly possible that you're going to walk into a situation and probably be hurt at a level that you didn't even anticipate because you walked into a situation not understanding who you were and where you stand. Because if you
Right.
don't know that, it's very difficult for you to then to listen. None of us are unbiased. We all have
Right.
bias.
Right.
But I think that sitting across the table from someone that you disagree with vehemently, there's always something that you can still agree on. And I'm trying to mine for where there is agreement before we process our differences. And so respecting people who are across the table, our political discourse is a class A example of how not to do this. But when people make it personal instead of the policy,
Right.
we cross the line. And so oftentimes that I realize there's people that I really disagree with, but I like them a lot.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We have a difference of opinion about something philosophically or spiritually or politically or class or whatever, but we really like each other. We
Yeah.
get on well with each other. And so maybe we could take more time up front investigating and being curious about who the person is that we're talking with and what their experience is, because I guarantee you, if you listen long enough, it will give you some justification about why they do what they do.
Yeah.
Why they're made the way that they are. It just helps tremendously. But man, I will tell you, it's taking years. I'm 53 tomorrow.
Oh, wow.
And
That's great.
I feel like it's taken the vast majority of my life to get to the point where I can listen with empathy and understanding versus, to listen for, debate or dialogue or whatever. That just it's a beautiful space to be in. It's hard, but it's a beautiful space to get into.
Yeah. You said when you were here with John, you said something that I just started laughing in a way that everybody was laughing, but I think I laughed a little harder than everybody else. You said, you know what? Can I just be honest with y'all? Uh, we have a weird family, and you were referring to the body of Christ broadly,
Yes.
right? But you were like, let's just be honest. We got a weird family here.
Yeah, some of y'all are weird. We'll be in the kingdom, but cousin Larry is not someone that I'm hanging out with a lot.
Yeah. There's something really disarming about just sort of admitting that, right? And it actually makes you appreciate the difference a little bit more when you can just recognize that this thing we call the church or this thing we call, our workplace, it is going to be a little weird.
That's right. That's right.
Because
well,
there's a lot of difference.
And to turn it around, let's just stop trying to be liked all the time.
Right.
You're not everybody's cup of tea, and so I'm not for everyone, but I'm perfectly fine with that.
Yeah.
I think there was a day that I maybe cared more about what other people felt about certain things. And I'm like, if I'm not offending someone, if I am not disrespecting a person's life and their family, well, then that's just that's who I am. And I'm very content with that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that was helpful for me. There was something just really disarming.
You may not want to start off a team meeting that way, but it's very true.
I might try it, just see how it works. I wanted to ask you this question. I didn't have a chance to do so the last time we were together, but we got into some of these issues when you were here. But as an African-American pastor and leader, I know you have a lot of thoughts about how the church could be better on this journey of diversity or multiculturalism. What advice would you give leaders out there to lean into this process and to lean in well?
I would strongly encourage leaders not to lean in until they've leaned in personally, both in prayer and study and relational connection. And the reason why I say that is because the part that I'm getting ready to mention is the hardest, which is systems and structure.
Mm-hmm.
So what we often see people, do is like, I have a Black friend and, we adopted someone or whatever. And you're like, that's wonderful. That has nothing to do with the systemic structures that undergird so much of our country and so much of our daily life that we are unaware.
Yeah.
And when we bring people into our organizations and claim that we are serious about change and serious about dealing with diversity and injustice, which are two different things, by the way. When we're talking about those things, what ends up happening is if we haven't done our homework, we could really harm and hurt the individuals who have come into the organization to help, but leave wounded. I've watched this in every organization that I've worked in. And the challenge is having supervisors or leaders who are unaware of their own blind spots. And then when things get hard, they're not willing to take the last 10%. And what ends up happening is the staff end up taking the brunt of the change. And so I would tell people, if you're serious, do the work. It's not my job to teach you or to coach you. It's my job to support you and walk with you. But do your work, because the cost of you not doing your work well, um, it can destroy lives.
Yeah.
And it's also okay if you're not ready to do the work or you don't want to. That's between you and the Lord, and just stay in the spot that you're in. You
Yeah.
know, that's it would be better for you not to attempt and harm and not harm than to attempt and really obliterate all the good that people have been working on up until then. So much I could say about that, but I've seen it happen over and over.
Yeah.
And it's just people not counting the cost and understanding I need to be tutored and learn from people who've gone further than me.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to make mistakes, but at least I can be aware of the things that I'm doing.
Yeah. So the work would be to put yourself in situations and under the tutelage of people and organizations that are a few steps ahead of you.
Absolutely.
Is that correct? Would that
Yeah,
be there's no set
absolutely.
curriculum per se. It's about, it'd be about being in a learning posture and being on the journey. Is that
Yeah, it really is a fair statement. And because of the multi-ethnicity of our world and our community, you and I are both we're in the academy, we're around urban sectors. This is not a black-white issue only. We have Latino and Asian, international, biracial, gender questions. There's a lot of things that we have to navigate. And so just understanding and taking a place of humility and placing yourself in places, go to visit another place of worship, build a relationship across the tracks with others, find yourself in places where you are the minority and learn about the surroundings and what you see and what you experience. You'll be a better leader for it, first of all. But second of all, when you go to take those steps to be able to lead, you will have greater authenticity as a leader because you've experienced some things.
Yeah. Yeah, really helpful. Ed, you were on InterVarsity Christian Fellowship staff for a number of years in a leadership position. You currently serve as the board chair for InterVarsity, and you're around young people. You love young people, and you've always had a heart for young people, and you're still young.
Absolutely.
I'm curious, what makes you
Young-ish.
about the next generation of Christian leaders, or young people in general? What are you seeing? So much talk about generational differences, but when you interact with your college student or young grad student, what makes you hopeful about the attributes and commitments that they bring to the table?
You know, I'm bullish on the next generation. Think that Gen Z and even the millennials are just in a place that they're asking questions that demand some genuine response from us. I love Mike Foster's has a primal question framework, and he says, the next generation is asking this question: Am I safe? Am I secure? Am I loved? Am I wanted? Am I successful? I think he's am I good enough? Do I have purpose? When you hear those questions and you think about the opportunity that we have to mentor and coach and then set up platforms to let them go and let them lead, man, that is what is exciting to me, is that they just need to know that you believe in them. They just need to know that you actually care and you believe that they can go further than you can go. And then get this, and this from our political landscape is atrocious, is that if you look at the average age of Congress, the average age of the Senate, and you have people running for reelection, this isn't ageism, just really just putting it out there, in their 70s, 80s. You mean to tell me that you took 40, 50 years and you didn't mentor someone to take over your seat? I think that we have a challenge not to be the heroes, but in this stage of our lives where we are at our fullest extent of leadership, gifting, is to look back and start going, who are the individuals that I am developing and bringing up to take my place.
Yeah.
That's when it gets fun. And that's why I'm excited about the both. And I think that the next generation is asking some real questions that if authentic leaders step up and they become them and they get the coaching that they need, they're going to run and they're going to do some fun things, I think, in the academy as well, in our organizations and even the houses of faith.
Yeah, boy, that's a good word. Ed, thank you for this conversation, wide-ranging conversation. I so appreciate your leadership. I've learned a lot from you over these last 2 encounters we've had in just recent weeks, and I've always looked up to your leadership. So thanks for all that you do and the way you carry out the work you do in the world with just a gentle touch, a gentle wake, but with a bit of Peter and boldness mixed in as well. And I really appreciate that about you.
Well, thanks, John. I appreciate you too and all the work you guys are doing at the University of Wisconsin. And I have a daughter that's coming this fall as a freshman. So I'm praying and hoping that she finds her way through the doors of the center. And thank you so much for the ways that you just continue to inspire the next generation and all of your staff, the hospitality you guys rolled out this summer for us. I can't wait to see you guys again.
Well, we're looking forward to having you, and you've always got a place to stay with us here. And I know you'll want to sneak in a visit or two to see your daughter. So we're going to take advantage of that when you come into town.
Thank you
Thanks,
so much.
Ed. Thank you, Ed. Please subscribe, like, and hit the bell to be notified when a new episode is released. You can also download this episode in your favorite podcast app. Click the link in the description below or search for the Upwards Podcast. If you appreciate conversations like this, we encourage you to attend an event at Upper House in person. You can see our full program schedule on our website at upperhouse.org/events. Thank you for tuning into the Upwards Podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's conversation. For more information about the Stephen and Laurel Brown Foundation and Upper House, please visit slbf.org. Go in peace to be a light on your campuses, in your churches, and in your businesses so that all may flourish.